I feel like our political leaders really need to step up in an extraordinary way. I mean, I can't tell you the pain it felt to have them take family leave, from 12 weeks to 4 weeks to off completely. Like, these are such basic necessities. Like, this should have already happened. This should be part of the process of understanding this year and what families have sacrificed. And when I think about like what new mothers have endured, and new parents have endured with young children during this pandemic and working full time and taking care of kids, the government owes us more than what they are giving us right now. And it's infuriating.
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and or listening to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, my podcast. And today I have a guest whose work I love and respect and have watched, and that is Erin Bagwell. She is the filmmaker who made Dreamgirl and then has followed it with an incredibly moving picture we are about to watch called Year One. And that is about her experience of being a mom who suffered from postpartum depression. I'm not going to describe the movie. All I'll tell you is that as someone who's directed 38 hours of documentaries and 4 shitty Hollywood movies, I know enough about the art that Erin practices to be able to tell you unequivocally that this is one of the best filmmakers I know. Her film packs a punch, and you will love it. When the movie is done in 30 minutes from now, Erin and I will talk for an hour and get back to the podcast format. So with no further ado, I'm going to ask my wonderful producer, Ernie, to take us off and put the movie up. Let's watch it and come back and talk with Erin. Thank you. Hey, it takes me a while to resurface every time I watch that movie, so forgive me if I seem scattered and very podcaster-like.
Hey, I'm right there with you. It's a big ending.
So, Erin, there's all sorts of things I want to talk to you about. I don't know where to start, so I'm going to begin with just a question that I've had every time I watch the film. But first, I just want to say, everyone, you are watching and or listening to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, with the director and maker of this film we just watched. If for some reason you were listening to this and unable to watch and have just heard the sound part or whatever, I don't know how we're going to do this, but it will be on what we recorded for Facebook, YouTube, and so forth. And I just beg you, don't just listen to the podcast, watch the movie. So, Erin, one thing that I'd like to ask you, just filmmaker to filmmaker, is how having a camera person in your house during the filming changed the experience and or helped you or didn't help you with the postpartum depression, because it almost seems like there was no camera person there. You're so natural and so real. And I just wondered how that worked. In other words, looking at the journey of the postpartum overlaid with the journey of the film, how did one affect the other, just in terms of your own emotions and how you got through the day?
Sure. Well, I also want to say that if people want to watch the film, it's available for free on YouTube. They can go to watchyear1.com. They can watch it right now. So absolutely, if they haven't seen the film, please pause the conversation. Take 30 minutes, a glass of wine, sit in your closet, watch it, and then come back and listen to this conversation. The filming of Year One was really interesting because when we started filming, I didn't know I had postpartum depression. So I, in my brain, was thinking I have all these what I thought to be really original, interesting, nuanced things that I was going through that are, really universal motherhood experiences. And I really wanted to talk about them. And I really wanted to share them. And I think part of it was my desire to understand why it was so hard for me. And that would be like the main word I would come back to. This was really hard. I didn't know if I had what it takes. there was a heaviness to that. And then we started shooting. And as I continued to kind of unravel, I learned that I had postpartum depression, and it changed my entire viewpoint of my motherhood experience, of my
Yeah.
journey, of what I was going through, of what was considered normal, and really changed the trajectory of the film. Because for me, it was about, okay, if this is what it is, then how do we find the healing part of this? And how do I work through this? And how do I shoot this? And how do I use this now as a vessel to have some kind of understanding of what I experienced, and really just to get through it and to see it through to the other side. And I felt really motivated that, I wanted to do that, and I wanted to get better, and I wanted to heal. And so that became a real driving force for the movie. And I will say, I've worked with Mary Perino, the director of photography, for 6 years before that. She's like a little sister to me. And she's so brave in the way she shoots, and so confident. And she's such kind of an integral part of our family that I kind of forget she's there. She's just around, and she's shooting, and she's here, and she's in that corner. And, Sal and I are talking, and she's kind of doing her thing. And she has such a powerful quietness to herself that almost gives you, as the director, confidence that, like, she knows what she's doing. I didn't need to worry about her. She was getting the footage she wanted to get. So.
Yeah. And I was wondering, during the course of that filming, if there was ever a time where the postpartum depression and your feelings about it were so intense in terms of thoughts of self-harm or something like that, where you just said, okay, that's it. I'm done here. I can't do both of these things at once. Stop filming. We're done. Or did you just push through?
Well, it's such a funny question, because I felt like when I was around Mary, my mood would lighten a lot.
Yes.
And I felt kind of purposeful. And so actually, those moments, those dark moments in the film, like there's the first recording where we see me kind of disheveled in the bed, and we have that messy montage of us up and down the stairs and things like that. I recorded on my phone, kind of in the moment. And we ended up using the phone recording because I was so emotional in it, and I couldn't reenact it later.
Sure.
And then for the shower scene, we actually reenacted that whole scene, which was wild to do and extremely vulnerable. And I wasn't sure what we were going to get or if we could do it. And I just told Mary, hey, listen, I explained to her what had happened to me. I believe it had been, when we shot this scene, it was actually towards the end of filming. And I said, a couple months ago, this is what happened. We don't really have any footage to describe or, to really show the darkness that I was feeling. And I want to get something in the bathroom, and I don't know what we're going to get. And I really want to put myself in that place where, I felt like I was hitting rock bottom. And she was like, okay, well, we won't stage it. You'll just go in, do what you usually do, get in the shower, and we'll see what happens. And Frank, I'm telling you, it was like, I'm not an actress. I don't really know like what the process is to get into, the zone or whatever, but I felt like I had kind of been overcome by like a trance, and I just started sobbing. And I think reenacting how emotional that moment was for me, and how real it was for me, and how scary it was, put me in a place where I really was able to release, and then also in a strange way to heal that moment, and to kind of allow myself compassion. And it was really transformative. And, we used like 20 seconds of that clip. I was in the shower for like 15, 20 minutes. I mean, I went through it. And, Mary was there so delicately, just kind of shooting. And it was a really wild experience. So, many kind of aha moments throughout filming year one.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that the impact of having a film being made, even though you're the director, about you, as it were, by someone in your house, was a good thing during that time, because there is something therapeutic if you're a creative person, which you are. You are a creator of folding the experience into something. And of course, a lot of creative people going through something think, if you're a writer, someday I'm going to use this in a book, and they can be crying their eyes out and really grieving. But there's another part of your brain that stays the artist and says, this would be good, if I go over the edge here and lose it completely, let's get a camera crew in here and record this. I'm being a little bit facetious, but as a writer, I know
completely.
that a lot of my work is biographical, of course, and even fiction draws from biography. And there's always that little part of your brain going, and then you feel sort of ashamed of yourself, like, hey, this is fraudulent. How can I be really in the midst of a depression thinking about this, knowing that I'm going to fold this story into something if I survive it? I mean, there is something about that, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think as artists, we know that the truth is so powerful. So if you're kind of allowing yourself to push to a place where you feel a little uncomfortable, that's where the gold is.
Yes.
That's where something's really going to resonate. That's where something is going to feel emotional and honest. And I think, I think it kind of makes sense that you would kind of, as a creator, keep that little, be searching for those moments, where's the truth? Where's the honesty? Where's the rawness? Where's the realness? Because those are the powerful moments.
Yeah. And then, of course, during an editing process, whether it's as a writer or as a filmmaker, I've talked to people who are thinking of writing a memoir who have read things that I've written, and they say, how can you be, so bold, or weren't you worried about this? And I say, hey, listen, there's a total difference between writing and editing. And it's the same in documentary filmmaking. Don't think about, is this going to embarrass my parents, or is it too harsh while you're writing this? You can go back and edit that in the cool, calm light of the project afterwards. But if you're already tripping over, how are people going to receive this? Is this too intimate? Am I being too frank? That's not what you do when you're in the raw state of creating. Does that resonate with you? Were there bits of this film that later you trimmed back thinking that was a little too intimate, or did it all, whatever came out?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I made this movie for me. Mm-hmm. I made it, as I said, as a journey of healing, to create a piece of art that would really teach me something and allow me to learn and process my emotions and what I went through. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, there are those moments where you think, oh, is this too much, whatever. But I truly edited this thinking no one's going to watch it. This is for me. This is for my soul. This is a conversation, that I'm going to have, and it's going to be as real and as honest as possible. So I didn't trim anything back. I didn't want to hold anything back. And I think part of that too is, my relationship to depression is all about hiding it, is all about pretending I'm fine, white knuckling through it, not asking for help. And I think it was such an excellent exercise for me to be vulnerable and for me to say, I'm raising my hand, I'm feeling suicidal, I'm not well, I'm waving 10 white flags. And so I really wanted, to push myself to go there, to be, to put it all on screen.
Yeah. And, you come away from the film with such respect for you because of the fact you have taken this hard dive into depression after having a child, this moment that, quote, is supposed to be joyous, and here you are suffering through it. And of course, you walk away with tremendous admiration for your husband as well. And, for the fact that he allowed himself also to be exposed as part of this journey. So did you and he talk about this, not during the filming as much, but as the project changed because you were changing and discovering this level of depression that was so difficult? Did it change the way you two talked about the film in terms of having this camera person in your house working away and so forth and so on? Or did he just sort of go with the flow on this? Because he seems like such a terrific person and has your back, so I just wondered how that all worked out.
Yeah, I mean, I will say Sal, I think one of the main reasons I married him is because I see him as like a collaborator in so many ways. He is super creative in his own right and does music and things like that. And it's always a joy to be able to, work together on something and to get his thoughts and and to make him proud when I make something. He did all of the beautiful music in the film. But it was interesting when I was editing the scene on the beach where I talk about being suicidal.
Mm.
I don't know if I had used that word specifically with him before.
Yes.
So, I was texting him, sobbing in the bathroom, kind of in that rock bottom moment. He came home, he knew something was wrong, but I don't think I ever articulated like that this is how bad it got.
Mm.
And so until we were editing and I was writing that scene, and it was so wildly probably inappropriate to have that conversation over a piece of art. But also, so freeing. And so, he met me with a lot of compassion and concern. And, but I really feel like making the film allowed us a certain amount of intimacy that maybe I wouldn't have shared otherwise. And same with my writing partner, Diana Matthews, when I sent her, because of COVID, we couldn't be in the room together. So I'm sending her kind of these 5-minute, 3-minute clips, as things are progressing. And when we got to that scene, I was like, oh my God, Diana, who's one of my best friends, is going to watch it. And I feel like that was, showing the two of them probably felt the most vulnerable in the process.
Mm. Yeah. It's interesting because the note that you strike in the movie of this sort of self-discovery through the depression, of course, I had a very different experience of early fatherhood in that I was a teenage father. I got Jeannie pregnant when we were 17 and 18. And that's, I'm pushing 70 now. It's a long time ago, but I can remember the depression that came with a very different kind of depression, not at all postpartum depression, but realizing that, as a teen father, in terms of my reactions to her, having been raised in a sort of Calvinistic evangelical background where men are trained to be very domineering and mean in some ways, and the sense of inadequacy and the sorrow that came out of the fact that I was so angry so much of the time at that period of my life, not about having a child in particular, but just my own sense of completely being inadequate to the task and not pleased with myself, got me as close to thoughts about suicide as I had been ever. I hadn't had those sorts of thoughts before that. And then, over the years of parenthood, I think any sense that you have somehow failed is a kind of depression in itself. And it seems that when you talk about feeling ashamed of not feeling the way you thought you should be feeling as you were discovering this, did that come from a sense of ignorance about postpartum depression itself? In other words, did you have a learning curve about what you were suffering from, or did you already know and it was just hard to deal with?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a twofold for me. I mean, I think my narrative around motherhood was what I learned from my mother, which is that, when I think about Mary Alice, my mom, she's like the most effortless mother. It fits so seamlessly with her identity. And, she's got like a perfectly clean house, and, she's got the calendar perfectly organized. And there's just such a beauty to the way she does the task that I so admire. And I kind of felt like, well, this will be easy for me. I'm going to walk in my mom's footsteps. I'm going to breeze through breastfeeding. She would tell me stories that I slept through the night at 2 weeks and I was this great baby. And I'm thinking, Ginny's going to be this perfect angel. And I had a really beautiful pregnancy. And so I think because of the pregnancy as well, I felt like I really bonded with her. I was really, I felt like I had all these intimate moments and I felt so strong in my body, and I felt a powerful connection. And then, when Ginny was born and I had, some birth trauma, and breastfeeding was terrible. And I cried every time I did it for 13 days. And she didn't sleep through the night for 1.5 years. I mean, just on and on of just things I didn't think we would have to deal with. And, I've suffered from depression since I was 16 years old. I know what depression is. I know what it looks like on me. But the weird thing about having a baby is that, you know, when I would be depressed before, I would kind of, go inward. I would sleep a lot. Um, you can be with your feelings when you're a regular depressed person. When you're a new mother and you're sleep deprived and you're breastfeeding and you don't get a moment to really even think about brushing your teeth or, let alone processing your emotions and the transformation you just made. I mean, I was totally blindsided.
Hmm.
The moment that I had my, rock bottom moment is a day that Ginny had uncharacteristically slept for like 3 hours. And it was the first time that I felt like I could breathe, and this was probably like 3 months in.
Hmm.
And I remember like thinking about how am I doing? How am I feeling? And it's just like everything is coming up. And I truly had no idea what postpartum depression would look like and how it would look like on me. And I do think it is a different animal, when a newborn is involved.
Yeah, the journey you went through that time, I know you're expecting a second child now. We've talked about this when we've chatted, and I think that baby's due quite relatively soon. Of course, one thing that you'll find, and you already know this factually, but you're going to find it experientially, is something I discovered as a parent and a grandparent. That the experience of the first child or the second child in no way matches the experience of a third child or something like that. You have one kid that sleeps fine through the night, the next one comes along and it's very problematic, and so forth and so on. Have you been concerned that you're going to have a repeat either in the behavior of the child you're expecting? Are you thinking, oh, wow, this one won't sleep either? Or are you, more relaxed about this because you got through a child who couldn't, and that all worked out in the end? And so did your postpartum depression. Does it give you more worries because you know what could happen, like a second hospitalization for some illness, and now you know what it's going to feel like? Or do you worry that you're going to be going through all this again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a big concern and something, Sal and I talked a lot about before we decided to have, to start trying for another.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest, I'm terrified of postpartum depression. I never want to experience it again. I don't think anybody should experience it. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. That being said, I am still working with my PMAT therapist, which is amazing. And we're dealing with a lot of these themes and we're talking it through. And she's there to remind me this is a new child and a new experience and, all the breadth of knowledge that I'm bringing as a second-time mother. And I will say I feel confident because I have the idea that you could even experience your motherhood journey and not know you had postpartum depression is terrifying to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to think that I thought that was normal, that was what it was supposed to be like, is so heartbreaking. And so I feel like now that I know if something isn't right or I'm having these intrusive thoughts, I know the numbers to call. I know, how I need to get support. So I feel much more prepared in the fact that I feel like I have the armor now to deal with it. And then I was getting emotional while you were asking the question because I'm like so obsessed with my daughter. Like, we're at such a good point in her life and her journey. And, she's about to turn 3. And I feel like, honestly, she's like inspiring me to do it again.
Yeah.
Because I want more of what I have with her.
Well, and you're experiencing the joy now that didn't seem possible when you were in the midst of the valley of the shadow of death, so to speak. And now you got past that and you're into this other stage. And of course, you're also learning that no stage of a childhood stays the same, because now your daughter is not, waking up and every 2 hours and ruining every night of sleep you've got. So, you at least factually know somewhere in your mind that this, there's an arc to this. And of course, that changes things. So right now, did you have the same level of morning sickness with this second pregnancy, or has it been different?
This pregnancy has been much harder, actually. A lot more morning sickness this time. A lot of weird, tiny medical blips and things like that have thankfully been resolved, but that I never had to deal with Ginny. So it's been definitely a kind of a stranger pregnancy, I would say. more physically demanding.
Yeah.
But also been kind of a joy because, nothing passes the time like chasing around a 3-year-old. So I
Yes. Yes.
die a bit quicker.
The medical blips, have those been things that sort of got to any level that threatened you or the pregnancy in terms of big health issues or not carrying the baby to term, or were they just things you could work through as they happened?
Well, it's hard to say because my my OBGYN is my best friend from high school. And so when things would come up, she is a very calming force and is like, don't worry about it, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. So, I'd be on the spectrum of Googling like, oh my God, I'm going to miscarry, which was a big fear in the beginning. I had a polyp in my cervix, then I had internal bleeding. I was on bed rest for a little while. But thankfully everything resolved. So we didn't get to that point, obviously, but it definitely was something I was deeply concerned about and worried about in the beginning.
Yeah. And you've gotten through that. Did that have some sort of an emotional impact in terms of any sense of triggering some levels of worry that made you feel depressed? Obviously not postpartum at that point, but did that get into that cycle again? Or was it something that you were managing in a kind of a different way?
It's strange. I feel with this child, kind of a weird level of, I don't want to say relaxed, but trusting, in that I'm with her as long as she'll have me, and I'm just kind of trying to trust the process. There's definitely days that I just have in general where, I wonder, oh my God, I'm having a bad day. Is it coming again? I think there's always those alarm bells. I'm always kind of, looking around the corner to make sure we're okay.
Yes.
But I will say, I honestly feel great emotionally and mentally. And, postpartum depression is something that statistically usually happens during pregnancy as well. So it's something all hands on deck. I'm being very aware of and trying to take care of my mental health. And a lot of that for this pregnancy has really just been trying to give myself permission to rest because I've been so physically exhausted by it.
We're talking with Erin Bagwell, who is the director, filmmaker, creative person behind 2 films at this point, Dream Girl. By the way, is Dream Girl also on YouTube?
Yes.
People can go there and watch that movie. We're not going to get into that. It's a different film, but it's wonderful. It's a wonderful movie, and also cross indexes with everything I'm interested in, as does the film we're talking about today, Year One. This is Frank Schaeffer. You're watching In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer and or listening to it. Please subscribe to the podcast if you like this. Please share it. Please tell people about Erin. Please tell people about her movie. Please share this with anybody who's thinking of having a child or has, or any woman who has experienced postpartum, or any partner of that woman who has experienced the person in their life they love experiencing this. It's really, I think, a tremendous, tremendous picture. I want to turn the page a little bit here and get into some things that are, as it were, ripped from the headlines. It seems to me one of the points that a lot of folks will resonate with watching the movie is you're mentioning that your husband was at home for that month and how things changed, not in any sense causing the postpartum because they're not related, but how he goes back to work after 4 weeks. My personal point of view is that there ought to be paid leave for all parents from the job. If the job can't handle the paid leave, the government should handle it, not as a socialist service to people, but because we want a happy, healthy population in the future. This isn't a luxury. This is an absolute necessity. My personal view, having had 3 kids and raised them and 5 grandchildren and doing daily daycare for 3 of my youngest grandchildren, as I have for the last 13 years, is that the best scenario, and I'm just running this by you, would be that each parent takes off 1.5 years fully paid. And if you're partnered, you could swap off. So for instance, your husband would have taken the 1.5 years. It doesn't have to be one after the other. You could have one partner stay home for 6 months and then the child go into some form of daycare or with a grandparent, but there ought to be a year and a half of paid leave for every parent. And if it's a partnered parenthood, that gives you 3 years, where between the age of birth, 0 and 7, you could take those times anytime. In the same way that we take Social Security, and from the time you're 64 on, you can begin to take that benefit. And then, up until you're 72 or 73, I forget, then you have to begin to pay down some of your savings and so on. In other words, it would be flexible. And it would mean that this was not a gendered thing, that it would be as normal, as cool, as expected for the female partner in a partnership where it's a male and female, or the gay husband or gay wife to swap off, go back to work. And I don't think this is a question that ought to even be debated. I just think it's insane that we even think that there's another side to this issue, that it would be too much help to people, or that it would stop them from wanting to go back to work and so forth. And so one of the political things that I think needs to happen in this country is that we have to make this an issue that unites right and left. If we're going to have family values, quote unquote, put up or shut up. And this seems to me the most basic family value of all. If you care, it just seems ridiculous and barbaric to me that we even have to have this discussion. And how soon women are booted out of medical care after giving birth. When Jeannie, my wife, had our first 2 in Switzerland, it was a 10-day hospital stay. Wow. Fully paid. I mean, nobody would. Why? Because they said, well, she needs rest and we're going to take care of her for 10 days. So she doesn't, there is no even question that we would send her home with this. The baby's asleep in a bassinet next to her bed. The nurse will come in on a heartbeat and help them both, talk about breastfeeding and all this stuff. The US is barbaric. And I think it's anti-woman, anti-child, anti-family. I think it goes far past getting a few things wrong. I think if you really look at the lack of help families get, women get in particular, it's true barbarism. We're in a barbaric, anti-child, anti-family country. So I look at your experience, and postpartum aside, that's a different issue.
I think they are related, though.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think they are in a certain, sense, because I do think, what we're doing is we're expecting kind of women to shoulder the burden of childcare and also to shoulder the burden of, their physical and mental well-being during such a transitional time. And I think it's really, I think it's insane. And I recently wrote something on my Instagram about kind of the honeymoon period that I had with my husband when he was home, and when, not when he was able to really do much with the baby because I was breastfeeding every 2 hours, but what he was able to do for me, cooking me meals, cleaning up, emptying the dishwasher. I mean, nothing is sexier than a man who will empty the dishwasher. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like being able to, have that bond and have that time is so important, because it's not about the baby, it's about the mother, and she deserves to be taken care of, and she deserves support. And especially, when young parents are in, have moved away from home. I was away from my family in Brooklyn, and it was awful. And, if you only have your partner's support and they're not there, it can really feel detrimental. And, as I said in the film, I had a meltdown when he went back to work. And, it's terrible that we have to put that kind of pressure on young families, that we have to kind of force them to figure it out. And I agree with everything you're saying. I think we absolutely, it's a human right. It's a necessity, especially when it comes to the mental health of the motherhood community.
Yeah. And of course, with the political divisions we have now, where the right wing tends, with a lot of evangelical Christian support and so forth, to shout down these sorts of things as socialism or too much help for people, or they won't want to work, or it saps people's motivation. They can't have it both ways, because then they lament that the population is dropping. There's less people having babies. They lament the fact that, our borders are crowded with people who don't look like them. You cannot call yourself pro-life or pro-family or pro-traditional values and forget the fact that evolution and or God or both formed us to be caregivers. and projects I've been working on for the last 5 years, I took that long because I had to do a lot of reading. And it just amazes me that any study of evolution and any study of human history shows that males and females equally are caregivers, that it has nothing to do with the way we evolved, that somehow this is a woman's problem and men kind of fit in around the edges. And I just think it's so ridiculous, because if you look at what's happening now post-COVID, where we've had this kind of grand experiment, and I don't mean it was a great fun thing. I had 2 good friends who died, but a grand experiment, basically where everybody had to go home and, as it were, take paternity and maternity leave for a year, no matter what stage of life they were at, and be home with whomever their partner or family happened to be at the time. Now you have all these guys like my son, who's a manager of a tech company in Boston, has said, you can find someone else and or let me be home 4 days a week because I'm not going back. I'm here with my kids. Yes, Jeannie and me do the caregiving. He works from the house, but he can come down and have lunch with us, or he can, do a school pickup or take child to a music lesson. They're at a different stage now, 7, 11, and 13. But there's a lot of people who are kind of voting with their feet. They're not going back to work, and or they're insisting on working from home. And there's a lot of men who are discovering that their priorities in life have somewhat shifted because they were given a timeout. They were given I'm not being facetious here, but kind of a year of almost motherhood for some of them, of like having to do this every day, more than unload a dishwasher, actually be a partner in a home with somebody or by themselves and a child. How do you think this is going to shake out in terms of our culture? What's going to be different when we find our new normal, whatever that is? It won't be the way it was before, but how's it going to be different?
Frank, it's such an interesting question because, there's my mother's optimistic, energy behind me is saying like, this is going to change things and we're going to be in a different place. And, we've had all these wonderful experiences, but I feel like our political leaders really need to step up in an extraordinary way. I mean, I can't tell you the pain it felt to have them take family leave, from 12 weeks to 4 weeks to off completely. Like, these are such basic necessities that, I agree with you, should be, it should not be a left or a right issue. It's an everybody issue. I feel like we need to have radical reflection on where we are going and what we are doing to really make change. Because I think the strange thing is, when I have these conversations with my friends or with you, we're all on the same page. Like, nobody thinks this is a bad idea, but somehow it gets filtered up along the lines that these divisions are happening. And, we've got to vote by party lines. And it's so convoluted that I fear we need some kind of bigger disruption, because even COVID, it doesn't seem like this should have already happened. This should be part of the process of understanding this year and what families have sacrificed. And when I think about what new mothers have endured and new parents have endured with young children during this pandemic and working full time and taking care of kids, the government owes us more than what they are giving us right now. And it's infuriating. And so, I mean, we want to be hopeful and we want to think that change is coming and that this big sweeping cultural energy will carry us to something greater. But I feel like at this point, we've, experienced COVID for so long, we need to see action now. That's what I want to see.
Yeah. And of course, we have some ironies that have come forth in the news recently. I mean, this is not, I don't want to make too much of it, but the idea that Pete Buttigieg took some time off with his newly adopted kids, and the right wing that spends the rest of the time sending cases to the Supreme Court to try to make abortion illegal, gets on his case and mocks him, both as a gay man, but also just as a father.
Right.
And, I meet stay-at-home dads who are doing a time of parental leave and swapping off with their partners, and they get a lot of grief from other men because it's culturally unacceptable. But the crazy thing is, if you look at human history, at every period of human history, it's always taken a village, and nature, evolution knew that no children would survive childhood, given that our childhoods are long because we are born with a brain a third of the size of the one it has to develop into, or it would kill all women in childbirth. And so what happens is that we are cultural animals. Childhood is long for human primates, much longer than for any other mammal or primate. And evolution, it's all about the survival of the friendliest, as I say, not the survival of the fittest. And part of that was that we had to be given a bribe. And of course, the bribe is the feeling of love. And when this is studied, it's as real as a broken shin bone. This is not a feeling on a Hallmark card. Love is a real deal that can be measured in your brain with oxytocin and the change in hormones and blood pressure levels. Studies have shown recently that in the last 20 years, they've been doing very serious studies that have been borne out across the board that, for instance, a gay adoptive male who has a child that they are not biologically related to will develop the same bonds and hormonal changes, and they're measured in saliva and blood and brain scans as a mother of a child breastfeeding her own child. And nobody saw this coming. And so the idea that somehow males have not evolved to be nurturers is a social construct imposed by an industrial society, but completely falls apart in terms of male reaction when we do bond with kids, as I have with my children and grandchildren, especially these 3 little ones I've taken care of for the last 13 years now. They're all school age, but I'm still doing school pickups. Right after this, when we talk here, I'll run off to get Nora. I've already got the piece of salmon ready to cook for her out on the counter, letting it come to room temperature. I'm going to grill it for her. I've chosen the broccoli she's going to eat. It's a huge part of my day. I can't imagine a day without childcare now in some form. And I loved the COVID year because we had Camp Schaeffer here. They were all here through the whole year. And we had an incredible time together. So, if I had a job now pulling me back to an office, I would do everything in my power to somehow not do that if it meant that I can't pick Nora up at school now and miss that latter part of the afternoon where I do childcare. So I can only imagine, the young father in Brooklyn who you see out there with a stroller now, who doesn't want to go back to work full time, the pressure on him to conform when you see the grief Buttigieg got and all the rest of it. I agree with you. We're not out of the woods. But I just don't understand why right-wing people in this country think that there's a virtue in smashing young parents in the face and telling them we're not going to help you. It just seems absurd to me. I mean, why does this happen?
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we live in such a capitalist culture and that women are providing free labor and free
Yes.
labor. And I think, when I think about, what you were saying before about allowing for 3 years of childcare, it's like, yeah, because who's going to pay for that? And right now, American families are, my family is. I'm, stepping aside from my full-time gig to be a full-time caregiver, which I have done for the last 3 years until we can get Ginny full-time into school. And so, I think we've been in such a position where we've expected women to carry this unpaid labor for so long, and it's been working for a lot of people. And I think, a lot of generations think that that's how it should be. I think it's an economic question of how these things come to be and what people expect. And, I do think with COVID and, as we're talking, that things are shifting and parents are shifting. And even we have some part-time care. And Miss Pam was telling me the other day how husbands now are showing up and picking up their kids, and that never happened, for her generation. And, things are absolutely changing. And I think as we continue to push, for what we want, but I just hope that as, my generation continues to grow into places of power, that they remember what they need and the support that they need. Because I often feel like by the time people get into positions of power, their priorities change, their economics change. I heard one of the best things I ever heard on like a panel at a world conference was this CEO of like a bank. And it was the smartest thing I ever heard. He's like, once you turn 30 years old, you shouldn't be able to vote anymore. And I'm like, I'm in my early 30s. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm still with it. Like, I should be able to vote, my opinion should matter, but he really broke it down, and that young people really care more about community. they care more about radical change. And we do tend to get more, stuck in our ways and, less open to change and things like that. And I thought, what an incredible thing to kind of put out into the universe that,
Yeah.
Young people really need to be in charge of making decisions. And to answer your question, I feel like until we can get to that place where we are listening to young people, I don't know if older generations are taking us as seriously as they should.
Yeah, and of course, we burnt the bridge at both ends to come up with a new expression, because we have said, okay, we're going to be an industrial and post-industrial society where everyone is working and the bottom line is going to be shareholder profits. We also still are going to try to have families and children. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to help you. Oh, and if you're a woman, there's this nice thing called feminism. You can break the glass ceiling, but while you do it, you have to pretend to be a male, because you're dangerous. You're going to get pregnant and it's going to interrupt your career. And by the way, if you're in a male that enjoys caregiving and really wants to do that, to be the guy that empties the dishwasher and helps and does some cooking and is involved with this whole spectrum of activity and childcare, either we're going to mock you or ignore you. And if you take the meager time off with a new child that you are allowed within our corporation, when you come back to work, you're not quite going to be on the same fast track you were. So, it's not just the way the thing's set up legally without support. But of course, any serious person looks at this and says, look, strong families, a strong educational system, parents completely invested in the welfare of their children is going to save any country untold trillions in expenses as time goes on, just looking at mental health issues, suicide issues, crime issues, broken family issues. If the only thing was trying to save the tax dollar, you would spend it on family strength, because that pays the biggest dividend. Everybody knows that, and still they don't do it. It's really kind of an intolerable position we're in. It's just ridiculous.
That just sparked something for me in a totally different direction, but I'll share it anyway. There's an incredible Netflix TV series called Made. Have you heard of this? Wally, have you watched it?
I haven't.
It's absolutely spectacular. And it's about a single mother who is kind of surviving domestic violence. And I know something that you wrote in your book is like, how can we, be in a nation that doesn't support single mothers? And that's something that I think about a lot with my privilege is, absolutely, like, how can the government not have positions in place and supports and all these things? And, as someone who appreciates media and art, it's a phenomenal, it'll make you want to, march down to the Capitol and, peacefully protest. It's a wonderful series if people are interested.
Well, thanks for pointing that out. It's interesting because I interviewed quite a few people on this podcast. I think you're probably our 30th or 40th guest, or maybe we've booked that many or whatever for a rather new venture. We've done all sorts of things with Moby and Representative Ted Lieu and Andre Dubus, the author, and now you, one of my very, very favorite filmmakers. And I'm being quite serious about that, Erin. I think you're just fantastic. You have such an eye, and you make such beautiful work. But between your film on postpartum, the stage of life you're at, which is sitting there with a 3-year-old and pregnant, soon to deliver a second child, a husband who's also a creative person and does things, there's a lot of intersection between this old guy pushing 70 and you at the stage of your life, which I think is a little unusual because we're both artists, we both write, we both do things. And, at this stage of life, I've been doing as much childcare in the last 12 years as a young parent who just chose to stay home has. I mean, literally, I'm not saying I do childcare and my wife actually does it and I sort of help out. I've been doing it. So there's a big intersection of interest between us. The book I've got coming out, Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, looks like it has a very conventional title, but as you know, because you've read it, I argue that we are all parents because we are all caregivers. I argue that have children does not necessarily mean biological children, let alone in a pair bonded relationship. Of course, it includes all single parents, but it also includes friends of mine who don't have children, or my son, Francis, who's a teacher, does not have children in that sense. But I think the choice that lies ahead of us, that I make the point in my book, and you make in your film, though you don't say it, and certainly your whole life makes it, is that you can either see yourself as a caregiver looking for validation and joy in the quality of the love you receive from your 3-year-old daughter, say right now, and the quality of love you give her and to your, pair bonded partner, your husband, or you can look for it as a definition of success as career, money, position, power oriented. Now, we all need jobs, but if you're defining yourself by that stuff, it's never going to get you through anything, because, I've had some successes and I've had some massive failures, but none of that impacts my capacity to feel joy, even when I'm unhappy about being a parent or grandparent. I know that sounds crazy. You can be feeling joy and also have been made unhappy by a baby staying up all night. But there's an underlying joy there. So I just want to get your comment on this idea that the big decision in life, as I see it, and you don't have to agree with me at all, of course, is to decide what you mean by the word success. And the way you define that for yourself and your culture, say in the area of help for parents and paid parental leave, if you had a culture that defined success by the quality of the human relationships of most people in your country, you'd be doing a lot to foster that. If you define it by GDP and shareholder profits, it's a whole different deal. It doesn't matter if everybody's living a joyless, lonely, stressed out existence. That's not the deal. So how do you react to my idea that all of this comes down to a narrow pass at one question? How do you define success?
Yeah, I agree completely with what you're saying. I think just to add on to it, I think that success, especially from my generation, is about being able to go inward. I think that we get a lot of, energy and influence from social media. And I know, being a mom who has put her toddler to bed at 9:30, I'm scrolling on Instagram till 11. I think that we're constantly bombarded with, this view of the world, this view of life, even just receiving so many images, it can be so fatiguing. And I think it can also be kind of damaging to our heartstrings of knowing what we want and who we want to be. And I think being able to go inward to disconnect, whether that's through your work or through your childcare or, sitting by yourself with a cup of coffee, I think, you're spot on. There's no way we're going to have a successful life, whatever that means, if we're not being truthful to what our purpose is and to where we're at. And I think it's very easy right now to be so in love and so influenced by, friends who just flew to London and, moms who are on their 5th baby and had a beautiful natural birth. And I think it's so easy to kind of step into somebody else's shoes. But I would also say that success needs to be about being honest about what that looks like just for you.
Yeah. And, you bring up screens, and it seems to me, as someone who's been doing all this childcare for these children, and now my granddaughter, Lucy, of course, has got a cell phone and she texts with her friends. And thankfully, we're good enough friends. So she texts me and tells me how things are going and visits me, comes down and rings the doorbell just to see how we are, which is lovely. And so it worked. We're really good friends. And I've got the 13-year-old girl who tells me all about her life and her friends and what they're doing and saying, and I just feel so honored by that. And, it feels to me like a wonderful thing anyway, to be included in her life at this point. But I think one of the things that made it work for me as a grandparent taking care of these kids is that I really resisted the world of screens in this way. And that is, I think, one of the roles every parent and caregiver should give is to not allow the child that you're trying to raise and love to have all their experiences mediated by either media or screens. I mean, just a regular example being cooking with Lucy, explaining to her, sometimes you get little fat burns on your arm, you're frying something, the oil jumps out. This is the real world. We're not looking at this on a phone, we're doing it. You get splinters when you build things, your feet get cold walking through wet grass. You go out and play in the snow, you do all this stuff. And I've tried to do everything I can for the grandchildren when I take care of them to not have their experiences mediated through anything. raw, tactile, touch it, do it, be it, see it. And that, to me, is a really bottom line kind of thing of mental health for all of us. I mean, it's not just children. We've got to do that for ourselves. I know you've got a 3-year-old now. How are you working through that with her in terms of screens and all this other stuff, and using a iPad as a babysitter or whatever it might be?
Frank, I'm an exhausted pandemic mother, and for me, I use screens as a tool for me when I need a break.
Sure.
I set a limit. I say, okay, we're going to watch, X amount of TV or whatever.
Yeah.
Or, at 3:00, I try to throw in front of the TV so I can clean the kitchen. We were very religious in the beginning when Ginny was born, that we weren't going to do any screens, Brooklyn mom, no screens, no TV. And we did that for the first 6 months. And then I realized the joy of watching Murder, She Wrote, at 3:00 when it would come on, and allowing myself the space to really get breaks. So, obviously it's the best when we have those days and we can just do everything ourselves and it kind of flies by. But I'm not a stickler either. I think they're an incredible tool, especially, if you're flying or traveling, or, you want to go to a dinner and have a 20-minute conversation with your partner. I think, you got to do what you got to do to
get that,
to survive, really.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think when I talk about a tactile, sort of unfiltered relationship with reality, that doesn't mean that some of that is not, sitting down and, putting a ballet on for Nora because she just loves something like that, or whatever it may be. We do that all the time. And I know at home that happens as well. But I'm saying that in general, it seems to me that the times that the kids benefit from most in terms of learning is doing rather than just watching. In other words, if you want a kid who's able to occupy themselves without a screen, then make it a very normal thing to have a lot of stuff around, whether it's clay or crayons or paper, so they can make stuff. If you're in a city, it's one thing, it's different in the country. But we have little sort of rituals like planting bulbs in the autumn in the yard, stuff that they can follow through. And then you get to pick any of these flowers in the spring because they belong to you, Nora. There's whatever little rituals we can build in that are not mediated reality, but direct, I think are really good for everybody, for the parent child. But I'm not an anti-technology person at all. We use that all the time. And I totally get what you mean. And I love that thing. What did you call yourself? An exhausted
pandemic mother.
Pandemic mother. I like that. That's maybe when you do your next movie, that could be the title. Exhausted pandemic mother.
Maybe.
Yeah. So what are your plans now? Just take a couple minutes here as we wrap this up. Do you have another film in mind at some point? Are you kind of scratching out on things, or do you not talk about potential projects, or maybe you're already involved in one? Day to day, I know you do a lot of different things. Just tell us a little bit about what you're into at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm, currently growing Human Life. Sometime this winter, in the new year, my due date is January 1st. So we're right around the corner. So, that's something I'm working on. I'm also helping a friend. I have this very brilliant friend, Ariane Adet, who runs an organization called Faces of Postpartum. And I'm helping her produce what we hope to be a TV series, potentially, about different postpartum experiences. So we're kind of just scratching the surface and working on that together, and kind of letting that organically unfold. And then, as far as my creative work, I consider myself a blogger and a writer, and I'm constantly sharing, not constantly, maybe once a month, sharing personal stories, aha moments about being an artist, being a mother, spiritual stories. So if people want to stay connected to me, they can follow my newsletter. And I'm really opening myself up in this new year of making and of continuing the year one conversation. And I don't know what that's going to look like or feel like, but I'm also giving myself permission that if I don't want to do anything and I just want to be present and kind of relive the honeymoon experience that I did not have with my first child, that's okay too. So yeah, kind of seeing what comes, and excited about the future.
Yeah, you and I are going to do a project, I think, if it works out, in and around your delivery of your second child. Our mutual friend, Jose Zilstra, who put me in touch with you to begin with, I think, and showed your movie or was involved with you at some point. Wasn't Jose part of this process for you?
Yeah, she was one of our first hosts to premiere A Dream Girl, my first
Yeah.
documentary about female entrepreneurs.
Yes. And Jose put me in touch with you. And she runs an organization called Gender Fair, which rates corporations based on how they treat women. And you can get it as an app on your phone and download it. And if you're going to buy an airline ticket, you might as well buy one from an airline that treats women better than the other airlines do. And so she does something very useful. But Jose is involved in as COVID permits, as it would be, to put together an in-person event in the New York area in a theater to present your film and you and me and my book in some sort of discussion, and depending on your availability with the baby and so forth. And I look forward to that. And I also wanted to thank you for the support you've given my new book, the fact that you've mentioned it at a couple of places and posted it. I really appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. And it's very gratifying for me to have written Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, and then to stumble on your work almost to the point of laughably being in line with what I've spent the last 6 years doing, both in the childcare, but also in trying to research why we have these powerful feelings of fulfillment from doing exactly what you're doing. So why don't we finish up with you talking not about me or my book, but talking about this powerful feeling of fulfillment of, let's call it joy, or however we want to label it, that happens in spite of the unhappiness of some of the suffering that goes with all parenthood, let alone postpartum. If you want to just talk about that a little bit, we'll wrap it up on that. And Erin, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And by the way, for anybody listening to this In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer with Erin Bagwell, again, please watch the movie on YouTube if you did not see it at the beginning of this podcast. Like the podcast In Conversation if you can, and pass the word on. Please tell people about Erin's work, and we will post all the ways you can get in touch with Erin everywhere this shows up, so that you can be in touch with this incredible work she does as a creative filmmaker, but also someone who's really dealing with an issue that faces so many families and so many women, and doing such a sensitive and beautiful job in addressing this. And so, Erin, talk a little bit about the joy of parenthood you've experienced in spite of, or because of, or along with. How does that all work out for you?
Well, it's funny. First of all, Frank, that was such a gorgeous exit-tro. Thank you for having me and for creating space for these conversations and your kind words about my work. I was actually just texting a friend who just gave birth recently. I feel like I'm a little like obsessed with new moms and checking in on them and making sure they're okay, and seeing how they were doing. And she was telling me a little bit about her birth story. And, she said, I didn't have that, they lay on your chest moment and you fall in love immediately. She was like, I felt like I didn't have that. And I was just validating her feelings that, yeah, I didn't have that either. I think it's, you have this idea of this baby in your head, and then you see them for the first time. And I remember thinking when Ginny was born, like, who is this person? Like, she had brown hair and brown eyes, and she had beautiful brown jaundiced skin. And I was like, who is this baby? And I feel like parenthood for me has been, not that first burst of like bonding, but of falling in love and of creating space to get to know another incredible person. And I think being a parent is, a first class ticket to really understanding somebody and creating space for somebody and seeing them and trying to guide them in the world. And there's nothing more powerful and wonderful and terrifying than doing so. And it's an absolute pleasure. And I'm excited to welcome baby number 2 into our, little mad family. And it's also, I think, something that resonated while you were talking is about being fully present. I don't think there's anything, that can really ground you more than like a screaming toddler, or a baby. I mean, they demand your attention. And I think, as people who are connected to technology and connected in so many different ways, what a pleasure to be able to, have somebody demand 100% of you and to be able to be there and to give that to them. So I thank you for having me on the podcast and for doing this video chat. It's been so wonderful. And I'm so grateful for the folks at home who've been listening and are joining along with us.
Yes, and please do get in touch with Erin and follow her in every way you possibly can. This is one of the more interesting, brighter, lovelier people that it's my pleasure to know. Erin, thank you so much for today. I adore the two movies you've made, Dream Girl and Year One, and I just think you're wonderful. And I wish you so much good things and happiness with the next child. I'll be one of those people texting you frequently to make sure you're okay. Okay?
Great.
All right. Well, much love to you and your family.
Thanks, Frank. You too.